Hi, I'm Matt Little. I'm the Director of Counselling and Education at EmpoweringAwareness.Asia, and I'm a proud sponsor of this podcast.
Hi, how are you doing, Sai?
I'm doing great, Sanjay. How you're doing?
Doing very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much for giving me opportunity to interview you for my YouTube channel and for my podcast and for my channels.
Of course, very happy to help.
So I know you, but I wanted to tell about you and your work to my audience. So can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Dr. Sanjay Popat. I'm a chartered organizational psychologist. So I specialize in work-related stress, work-related well-being, and essentially understanding why did employees develop stress, and how they can cope with it. But I have a specific interest in healthcare staff because it's quite a high stress profession. So my PhD involved junior doctors in the UK. And 58 junior doctors across the UK kept an audio diary for 2 months. So they verbally recorded stressful and traumatic incidents to really understand why is this happening and how does this develop over time. So really interested in helping employees minimize stress that they encounter at work.
So this is the major thing that the entire world is connected with. So why you wanted to do doctorate studies on it, and what is
Mm.
that motivation for you?
So I think growing up, particularly being South Asian, and also in the community of school, we're always raised to talk about good things, good emotions when we do well, but not encouraged when things aren't going so well, when we're not in a good mood, when we're not happy, and sometimes even discouraged societally. So I think even just implicitly growing up, maybe it was just an unconscious attraction towards shedding more light on things like stress and mental health issues. But in terms of the healthcare interest, a few of my friends are junior doctors in the UK, and they started their job, and I noticed it was a very stressful profession. So that's why I chose junior doctors in particular. And in the UK over the past 15 or 16 months, it's been a very turbulent time with junior doctor strikes here in the UK. So I think generally I'm interested in stress, but particularly in doctors.
So what are the factors that make the employees to become stressed?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the context, the organization, but generally there some rough ones could be things like workload, understaffing, not having enough senior support, and we also know not having enough control in your job. So if you're not able to choose your tasks, choose how you want to do your tasks, then that can be very stressful as well. And what's called role ambiguity, so not having a clear or defined role. So for instance, one day your manager says do this, and another day he says or she says do this. So not having a clear sense of what actually your job is, that's another very common stressor. But it does depend on the individual job and also the individual person. Different people have different thoughts about themselves, about the world, about other people, and that will guide what they see as stressful. So it's also a perception as well.
So organizations and businesses have different goals and different things to achieve. So how
Mm.
do you think that they are going to make employees be stressful for the projects that they have?
So we are seeing an increase in stress, certainly in the UK. And I've seen in India as well, there's been some press around EY and these big corporate companies. But the thing I would say to organizations is there is a financial incentive for dealing with employee stress. It's not as if it's not in line with your bottom line of making money. Studies have shown a happier workforce equals a more productive workforce. There's less costs around, rehiring employees or training employees or lost days at work to productivity. So I think these organizations should also realize that putting the people front and center will also help them with their financial goals, which I know is the big motivation of these top boards in these big corporate companies. But the two should go hand in hand. They're not competing with each other.
So what do you see in your work experience? What do you observe?
So what particularly with the doctors, we're observing high rates of stress, alarming rates of burnout. And in my work in particular, we had a lot of very emotional entries. So people were doing these recordings and sending them to us to listen. I had many tearful entries, people reporting, depression, anxiety, sometimes even suicide ideation. So some really severe outcomes from work. And I get challenged a lot by people in the profession that I do. A lot of these people say, well, how do you know this is the work that is doing this? Could it not be their childhood or personal circumstances? Of course it could be, but from what the employees are telling me, and also from the prior research where we can look at and kind of tear apart these two things, we are really seeing that work pressure can have very severe consequences for employees, as I mentioned. And stress can lead to so many different outcomes, both biologically, so, it can lead to heart issues, psychologically, things like post-traumatic stress disorder, but even like behaviorally, so maybe drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and these things can go on for some time, and then it can almost be like a cycle. So you start to cope with the alcohol, and then your stress levels take a hit, and then you're relying more and more on alcohol. So over time, it can lead to some really harrowing outcomes. So I think it should be taken very seriously by management as well as the individual employee.
So work is very important for any human being for the survival, and because of that, human does different jobs and different professions, and which is actually creating stress and becoming going into the negative mind state. So how can they be good and maintain good health, mental health, in order to be happy and give the great environment to their family and to their children, or to their grandchildren, or to their parents?
So I think there's two kind of angles here. One is the individual and one is the organization. And I suppose a lot of my work is from the organization's point of view. So I would say to any organization, you really need to almost do like an audit of your employees. So questionnaires or interviews or focus groups, really looking at what is troubling that employee or this group of employee. So what I found in my research, there were certain common sources of stress in the NHS. So for instance, not being able to take annual leave. So when the organization knows what their workforce is finding problematic, they can then work on solutions to deal with that. So maybe if it is around understaffing, is there any way to put more staff on? But what I often get as well is, particularly in the healthcare profession, it's not always possible to eliminate all the sources of stress. So for instance, you're always going to have ill patients. Doctors are always going to have to see sick people. So then the organization really needs to look at what can we do after they've experienced this source of stress to minimize the outcome. So for instance, can we run mindfulness sessions? Cognitive behavioral therapy is another big one. So these are kind of secondary interventions. So that's kind of the organization's point of view. For the individual, I think, we can always try and build resilience, and that's a really good thing. Look at changing our mindset, focusing on positivity. But in my opinion, there is a limit to that. If you're having a particularly toxic workplace, I think there's only so much resilience you can build before you become symptomatically stressed. So if it's possible, speak to your line manager, speak to HR, show them that you're encountering some difficulties, and work with them. I don't think there's any weakness in speaking out, that you're finding it tough. And it is their responsibility as well, particularly if the sources of stress are at work, to help you deal with that. And what I found in my research is that when people are better at work, they are also then happier at home. A lot of times they may have issues at home, but it's almost like a feedback loop. So taking things from the organization's point of view and also the individual is important.
How this stress is created?
So that's a really good question. And that's what my research is focused on. I think there are different ways. But in my research, what we show is that actually the meaning we attach to certain sources of stress can then develop how much we suffer from that stress. So for instance, in my research, if we take the example of patient death, a lot of these doctors were dealing with difficult patients. But some trainees gave meaning to patient death in a very healthy way. You know, everybody has to die, but I'm fortunate enough to help these people in the last few days of their life. So what we found was, although initially that patient death was very stressful, it tended to reduce over time because people gave this positive meaning to that stress. Whereas for other junior doctors, they gave meaning to patient death in an unhealthy way. So, for instance, I'm no good at my job. If I was better, less people would be dying. And then this kind of acted as a lens through which they saw that source of stress moving forward. So they ended up in these vicious cycles. And I think that's why cognitive behavioral therapy, challenging these negative thoughts, can sometimes be really useful, because we can become quite distorted in our thinking. And so for me, that's where my focus is on with how stress develops. It's a lot to do with the perception, how we perceive things. I mean, some people are scared of dogs. Other people are not scared of dogs, and that may be because of a past event in childhood or whatever. So it's really how we're looking at things that I'm interested in, and that we know causes a great deal of stress. So of course there's other things, you know, personality traits can make you more susceptible, but my research focuses on how we think about our work.
So you work in organizational perspective, and organization have different kinds of employees who come from different backgrounds with different experiences. Like you said, some people get scared of dogs, some people may not. So like different individuals have different levels of controllability and sensibilities. So how this organization manages this?
So it's a very good question, because everybody's unique. So I think although the perception may be individual, if enough people are finding something about their work stressful, then the organization needs to do something about it. So although everybody's different, for instance, in my research, we found about 81% to 90% found a high workload to be stressful. So although everybody's different, they're all complaining about the same thing. So I think the organization really needs to look at where are the overlaps here. Even though people are perceiving different things, if a lot of people are looking at one particular thing is stressful, then that really needs to be taken into account. But that's not to say that if one person is finding something stressful, that the organization should ignore it. They should also look at speaking with that employee. Maybe it's something to do with a particular colleague that has been very rude to them, been quite traumatic. And so, of course, maybe that junior employee is going to be the only one affected because they were the only one in that argument. So there's still things that can be done. For instance, speaking to the supervisor, maybe reprimanding them. So yes, they should be looking at these common grounds between people, but that doesn't mean that smaller things for individual people cannot also be stressful.
Organizations have their own goals and their own financial things. So how can they able to manage and reduce the stress in employees?
So I think here it's some bigger organizations will have departments like occupational health departments which focus on reducing stress for the employees. But say if it's a smaller company or maybe a startup, then I think managers also have a responsibility. They may be doing the marketing themselves. They may be doing the accounting themselves. But also they really need to be managing their employees. And like I said, so auditing is one thing. And if they're not able to do that, if they don't have time to do that, they can always have third-party consultants. So these big, like EY, KPMG, PwC, all of these companies offer people advisory services as well if they're not able to. But I think it's really about just as you're making time to do the accounting and to do the marketing, you also need to make time to put employee well-being up in front. Maybe that's a day a week where you focus on that. Maybe it's 2 hours you block out as a manager, one day in particular. But it is about having it there equal to these other departments or other objectives that you may have. So I think that's how younger or maybe newer managers in smaller companies may work on that.
So what are the what are the experiences that you hear in your work from different people?
about their sources of stress or how they
Yeah,
react to it.
the kind of problems that they come with.
So I think one of the main ones is a high workload. So that would be the main thing that we're seeing in the UK. So an overburdening of whether that's long hours, or for doctors maybe it's a lot of administrative responsibilities, or maybe it's just being interrupted at work. So I think we often underestimate interruptions at work, trying to focus on a task, but lots of different people asking us different things. The other one is not feeling supported. So either senior managers being too busy, or the senior managers just not willing to help. But another one is conflict. So often very toxic workplaces. So being shouted at, sworn at. In my research, there was a lot of discrimination based on gender, skin color, the racism, and also just feeling not valued in that organization. So I think these are the kinds of issues we see: workload, understaffing, lack of senior support, and conflict at work as well.
Is it possible to completely remove the stress from the organization?
So I think it depends on the organization, and it depends on the source of stress. So as I said earlier, the patients in a hospital, probably not going to remove it. But something like a lack of senior support, yeah, we can work on that. We can put more managers in place, or we can have more dedicated time. Maybe it's just the fact that our employees don't feel like we're giving them enough time. So maybe we can do drop-in sessions. We can do, I know you organize this with like a Calendly kind of approach. Maybe they can do something like that. So yes, certain sources of stress can absolutely be minimized, if not eradicated completely. Other ones maybe not. And that's where we need to work on things like mindfulness, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, support from the organization more widely. But we should be coming at this from different ways. So yes, trying to remove the source of stress, but looking at, if we can't remove it, what can we do to help our employees?
So how this technology is impacting the organization and the stress level in employees?
So that's a good question. So I think technology can be very useful, but it can also be a bit of a challenge as well. So in my research, I don't know if you know about the NHS in the UK, but it's trialed to make a huge kind of system where everybody's patient records is on a central system, and they spend lots of money on that, and it failed. So as far as my understanding goes, within hospitals, they have their unique kind of system in place. And what doctors told me, that this was very difficult for them. They needed kind of credentials, pass keys to enter every time they wanted to look up a patient. Things like printers not working, or different technology, from my research, showed to play as a hindrance to their work in lots of different ways. And I think we talk in psychology about a socio-technical approach. So having the people on one hand and having the technology on the other hand, and we need to try and make them blend as much as possible. And in the NHS, I think that's lacking. So I think in the NHS, technology is definitely seen as a big hurdle, and one that I think they need to work on a lot in that sector specifically.
So when you are interacting with the organization heads or the business owners or the CEOs, so what kind of conversations that will be going on between you and the leaders?
So I think what they want to know is, how will this benefit them? So I'm not saying that all CEOs are bad and mean people, but a lot of them are focused on the financial objectives. So if they want to take well-being into account, if they've come to an organizational psychologist, it's probably because they're already having an issue. So they already know the benefits of improving their employee well-being. But there's plenty of other managers out there that are not knowledgeable about that, and they don't really see the benefit. So a lot of the conversations I have, for instance, with senior NHS leaders, is how will this benefit us, but also how can we do this cheaply, and how can we do it in a kind of cost minimization perspective. So a lot of the internal and beginning meetings will be, okay, we realize this is a problem, but how can we address it in a kind of a streamlined manner, but also in a way that minimizes costs? So that will be the first few conversations. And then it's about working collaboratively, because some things they won't want to do. Maybe I suggest something that would just take too much money for them to implement. So then we really need to work on how can we do this in a way that is suitable for them. And then after that, I think it's about, although we've given those suggestions, it's about tracking them. Although we may have given them evidence-based solutions, they need to keep an eye on that. After a year, things may change. So the conversations then would be, okay, what has changed and how do we keep pace with the changes in the organization's climate, and then readapt. So then we would look at things like using data to track how effective that intervention has been. So I think data really needs to be at the heart of everything, and that's always at the forefront of these conversations.
How do they find there is a problem and they need a organization psychologist?
So sometimes it will be because they get a lot of different employees coming up to them and saying, we have a big problem here, or their HR department is saying, we have a lot of burnt out people. But I think most often it's because they're seeing lower productivity. Maybe half the workforce is off with stress, or maybe they're noticing productivity issues, maybe a certain amount of days being lost every year. And I think then they start to see, okay, if we're losing staff, the other ones that we do have are taking the brunt of that. They still have the same workload. They're becoming burnt out because the other staff are not here. And the ones that are not here are taking time to return to work. Why is that? Then it starts to impact their financial incentives. So I think that's most often why they come to organizational psychologists, because they're seeing an effect on their profit, their revenue, and so forth.
Product-based or service-based? Which organization will face more stress?
Oh, that's a good question. So most of my research is about services in healthcare. So I think I don't have any concrete research about which is more stressful, but we know that caring professions, particularly in the public sector in the UK, so things like certain teachers or healthcare doctors, healthcare assistants, we know that they're facing slightly elevated levels of stress compared to other organizations. But also we're seeing in the private companies, the EYs, the KPMGs, they're working long hours, they're having high levels of stress. So I think they're certainly catching up, but certain industries are more prone to stress just because of the nature of their job, for instance, having dying patients.
Small, medium, or large? Which scale of the organization have more stress?
So I think it can happen in any of them, but I think when you're having very large organizations, often it's quite bureaucratic. And because of that bureaucracy, people are just feeling like a number. They're feeling like their concerns are not being heard. Whereas anecdotally, hearing from smaller companies, because there's a small team, it's a more kind of team-based, family-based structure. And so when they go to their manager and they're saying they're having issues, it's more taken seriously. Not always the case, but that's just what I'm hearing through the latest research. So I would say large organizations at the minute, and also medium-sized organizations, are particularly in trouble with regards to burnout.
So do you have different practices for different types of businesses?
So it really depends on the amount of employees. So more employees will necessitate a different approach. So not a different package, so to say, but a different approach. So as I said in my research, we use diaries. So obviously it's not possible to use that with 1,000 employees or 500 employees. So then you need to start picking out representative people from each department or a kind of target group of people that you're looking to target. So using the same approach, but a different way of doing it depending on the amount of employees there.
So tell me about the award that you got, when you're doing PhD.
So the award, it's called the Grigor McKellen Doctoral Dissertation Award. So what it was is in the field of management, so organizational psychology, it comes under management. Anybody that wants to apply puts forward a application, and a panel of senior scholars from different organizations read it. And then 3 finalists were chosen to go to Milan to present their PhD to senior scholars there. And then one of them was chosen. I was very fortunate this year to be the winner of the award for having a novel PhD, and also one that has impact in the real world as well. So very fortunate this year.
So how you help, the organizations or the individuals to have this well-being?
Yeah, so I think it's first of all the tailored approach. So developing that audit, finding out what the issues are, and that will be different for every organization. And then working with the management to create tailored solutions. So for instance, can we do something here around increasing staff or job crafting? Can we allow employees to develop their own jobs to a certain extent? Can we give more control? Can we provide more feedback? Can we give them more autonomy? And then we try and implement that. And then later down the line, we track how successful that has been and change it if there are any changes needed. So that would be the basic way that we help employees.
So in this year, you won an award also. Can you also mention or tell about that?
So I think, the other award was so my university where I did the PhD, I won the award for the best PhD there as well. So that was more internally, but nevertheless, really happy to win it. And I think after 4 years of difficult work with the PhD, it's nice to be rewarded, because I think when you finish the PhD, it's always on to the next thing, publish the papers, on to the next kind of project. But to stop and be rewarded for the hard work means a lot to me. And also it's very motivating to continue doing what I do, because it's very easy to be burnt out after a PhD. But it's just exciting and good to know that my work has made a difference, I suppose.
So giving talks through conferences and nationally and internationally, and through podcasts and in conferences. So how is that experience, and how is that is making people to think and increase the productivity?
So I think a lot of the time with academic work, it just goes into a thesis or goes into a journal, and that's it. So doing these things like the podcasts, doing conferences, doing talks, I think it is an important part of my job, because it helps to translate the academic research into real world insights. And I think it can really make a difference on the ground. So I've done a few talks with doctors who have said that they're already using my research in their day-to-day practice. And that means so much to me, because what is the point of doing this research if it doesn't help people in the real world? So I think these conferences, podcasts, talk is just a way to connect to people and to, in a very easy to digest way, translate those complex findings and psychology more generally into usable insights for employees, for doctors, for organizations. And that to me is one of the most rewarding privileges of doing this job.
So why do humans need the feelings and thoughts and the ideas which have no form, and that needed a physical form called body? So why these two are interconnected, and why this is happening?
So we're seeing a lot more research about the mind and body connection. So I think that's a really interesting area of psychology. For instance, with stress, although it's in the mind, we can get palpitations, we can get chest pain, we can get anxiety attacks, and panic attacks even. So I think we're starting to acknowledge more and more how the mind is influencing the body, but also more and more research is now showing that the body influences the mind as well. So there's this thing called interoception. So when we enter a situation, the new scholars are saying, well, actually, we don't think about things first. Our body is telling us, and then we form an emotion. So we may go into a bakery, and we may smell the bread in the bakery, and then we start to salivate, and then we have an emotion, oh, I'm hungry. So I think it's a really interesting idea. Do we think first and then have the bodily sensations, or do we have the bodily sensations first and then have the thought? And that is an avenue for future research. But you raise a really interesting point here that they're very interconnected. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, especially, if someone's having what we call psychosomatic symptoms, so things like I said earlier, palpitations, a lot of the times brushed off. Oh, you're feeling it. It's not really there. Or even with panic attacks. But I think we really need to acknowledge that very physical symptoms are often an outcome of stress, and we need to take them as seriously as the psychological symptoms.
So I see your work and you have published in, various publications like The Guardian, UK Parliament. So can you tell about it to my audience as well?
So when I was finishing the PhD, I did a blog just trying to summarize the findings in a very simple way, and that went on to our university website. And then there was a lot of press interest, media interest from that. So The Guardian was one of the main ones. And it was also in the junior doctors' strike. So a lot of the junior doctors were taking time off work to advocate for better pay and better working conditions. So I was very fortunate to have a whole feature in The Guardian, which has led to a lot of other opportunities. I was also invited on German TV to speak about junior doctors. And from then, it's kind of been a ripple effect. So things like iNews, other things, the Indian press, Nigerian press as well has been really, really interested. And the reason I do that is because I think it's very important for the public to know what the research is saying, so they can have a balanced opinion of certain topical issues. So for instance, with the junior doctors in the UK, I wanted them to know what these junior doctors are going through. And then after this, the British Psychological Society, so in the UK, that's our regulatory body, or one of our regulatory bodies, they've asked me to be their media spokesperson. So for anything around work-related stress or burnouts, I'll be representing the BPS to speak on these issues to the national media. And then with the Parliament, that came a bit afterwards because the Parliament, they may not be seeing all this press. They may not be seeing my work. So I wrote to the Parliament to highlight my research, which was used in their debate around how to deal with NHS productivity. So that was published by the Parliament. And that's really important because often it is Parliament that is making these decisions regarding healthcare staff. So again, all of this really to bring the research to the forefront, to educate the public on these important issues, and again, to hopefully influence policy making from the top people in Parliament.
So understanding and listening and doing research about stress is not stressful?
It is stressful. We had some very difficult recordings. Like I said, people were tearful. People were having panic attacks, this kind of thing. So it was very difficult to listen to that. But I think at the end of the day, knowing that the research is being used to understand human behavior and potentially being published and influencing the way people talk about stress, the way the public understands stress, and the way decisions are made by managers and Parliament regarding stress, it makes it all worthwhile. But you're very right. I was getting these difficult recordings, 3 a.m, Christmas Day. I was being sent these very traumatic recordings, so it was very difficult. And in hindsight, I'm not sure if my university let me do such a difficult study without any other people on board. But at the end of the day, it was worth it, and I'm glad that in the end nobody died, nothing like that. So I think it was worthwhile, and hopefully the findings are worth influencing people about.
So me being technologist, working for a product-based or a service-based company, or other businesses or other employees working for something that is created by human and working for those businesses, and you working on a nature product called human. So how is that? How different is it studying and doing PhD on it and doing research on it, and you're working on something which came from the nature called human? and studying and understanding it, how different it is from understanding, compared to other professions or other professionals.
You mean human behavior?
You took a subject, you wanted to do a PhD, and you have continued your studies in human related subject, like
Mhm.
human is the nature product. It
Yes.
came, human is a nature product, and we, took products, technology that created by human. We are working on something that is created by human. You are working on things that are created by nature. So, how different it is, and how you as a human being, how satisfied you are understanding the natural things.
So I think for me, humans and the behavior of humans influence everything. So whether that is making the technology that I know you're very much in the technology field. If a human is made that, then their well-being can influence the effectiveness of the product, for instance, or in a panel meeting about the development of a technology. If everybody is saying, okay, this technology is great, and someone is saying, well, actually, no, I think we can improve it first, then that human behavior can influence the improvement of the product. So for me, human behavior infiltrates all aspects of life, whether that is in doctors, whether it's in lawyers, whether it's people creating technologies. So I think if we are able to understand human behavior, then everything that develops from humans will be even better, because that means that they are at their optimum state. And I think people perform better when they're in a sense of good well-being, good mental health. So I think it ripples into everything we do. But I think it's a very interesting point that you raised, that humans are not man-made; they're born, and technologies are man-made. So there is a kind of dialect there. But I think one affects the other. And then potentially it could be a feedback loop. So if we create really good technology that helps humans, then the technology can go back to improving the human as well. So it's almost like a cycle. So very interesting.
So you are the person who are studying on intelligence and psychological things of human being. So what do
Hmm.
you say to the people who are working in technology and who are working on artificial intelligence?
So I think that's a very interesting question. My research area isn't intelligence, so I don't have too much to say about it. But I know that intelligence is partly made and is partly learned as well. So there is perhaps a genetic component to it, and there's also a lot we can do to teach people. So I don't know if that translates into artificial intelligence at all, but that's all I have to say on that. I don't really know too much about it.
So in order to have the alternative human created an automation and making humans to reduce their stress and reduce their energy and reduce their effort. So the human created an artificial intelligence things called ChatGPT. There are a number of tools which are making things by itself. I'm a DevOps engineer. I work on a lot of automation tools which
Hmm.
alters humans' work. So the work will be done by the machine instead of human, and machine is lifeless and emotionless, so which
Hmm.
doesn't have stress. So what do you say, like humans are today like working on, all the technology companies are into
Yes.
artificial intelligence. So you are the person who understand the human thing which is called stress, which humans don't find in artificial intelligence machines. So how they should be, those products in order to be eventually artificial intelligence machines are for humans who has stress. So
Hmm.
who is going to have stress. So how it should be, what kind of advices or what kind of suggestions or inputs that you want them to put in their minds if they're watching this, and if they're if you think that it should be it should be taken seriously.
So I think that's a good question, because stress can be a hindrance. When people are too stressed, they may not do their work well, but also stress can be a driver. It can motivate us, and sometimes we do very innovative work when we're stressed. So, it's on one hand, people will say get rid of stress and have these emotionless AI because it will do better work. But at the same time, stress is human, and without it, we can't connect to others. So I think there needs to be a balance there. And I'm not sure how these engineers, how these technology people will do it. But I think stripping a machine completely of any human aspects like stress is dangerous, but having so much human feelings where it potentially overrides humans is also dangerous. So I think there needs to be a balance there. But I'd be interested to know your perspective. Can you teach these AI to have feelings, to have certain emotions, or not really?
Yeah,
You
because
can.
yeah. So, and where do you find the stress, and which industry experts or professional you find most?
So the caring professions. So people like nurses, doctors, teachers is another big one. A lot of public sector work tends to have more stress than private sector, but equally it is growing in all sectors.
So, how do they do, the practice in order to be stressless?
So I think it's very difficult to be completely stressless, and also stress can be good. We talk about challenge stress and hindrance stress. So hindrance stress is bad stress. It leads to negative outcomes. But research has shown that challenge stress, so things like deadlines, for instance, can motivate us. It can actually lead to higher productivity in some cases, more innovation, more creativity. So I think it's not about completely removing stress, but it's about adapting the work environment to focus on, I suppose, certain stresses rather than others where possible. So there is a big paper in 2004, I believe, saying that things like time pressure and deadlines are good. We need them, so we shouldn't try to eradicate them completely. But things like role ambiguity, so not understanding your job, or conflict at work, they are hindrance stresses. So they are very, very bad. So we should try and get rid of them as much as possible. So I think it's not as simple as completely removing stress, but being a bit more nuanced in how we go about that. So for anybody interested, they could just type in challenge and hindrance stress on Google, and they can learn more about which stresses are shown to be better than others.
So at last, as a organizational psychologist, so what is your observation about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
I have. So when you asked me to be on this, I looked at all your videos, and I think what I would just say, I think it's such a good thing that you've been able to contact so many different people, different industries, and I think that will bring you such a variety of knowledge. But also, when I was watching your videos, you're very good at researching the person, and you're very good at, like today when I've been speaking, picking up on what I've been saying and asking very tailored questions to bring about the best in people. So I would just say, keep doing what you're doing. I think it's amazing. I think you're giving people a very individualized interview, which is really important. And yeah, keep up the good work, and I can't wait to see where you are in 5 years.
Great. So I have done masters in software engineering, also bachelors in computer science and engineering. Right now, I'm working as a DevOps engineer for a London company remotely from India. So that's my full-time role. Apart from this, I'm interviewing experts like you who are already in the industry and who are from different parts of the world and who are working in different professions and who are from different backgrounds, who are coming from different experiences. So me trying to explore their experiences and trying to ask questions from their experiences from different industries and who are completely from different parts of the world. So how this diversity is going to helpful for me in future and for my career.
So I think diversity is so important, whether that's in any kind of workplace or in who your guests are. And I think what that does is it means your knowledge base is not narrow. You're having lots of different types of knowledge, but you're also having very different perspectives on different issues. So when you go into industry, that will be a huge benefit for you because you're not narrowed down to a certain mindset. And in the workplace, we know that having an open mind, a growth mindset is so important, and it actually predicts certain sources of success. For instance, innovation, creativity. So if you're able to use this and remember what your guests are saying and take that with you into the workplace, have an open mind, also being critical, so not accepting everything the guests say at face value, but also thinking, this person said this, but this person said this, which is this true? That kind of skill will also help you. And I think you'll have a very successful career.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. I keep your words in my heart. So, can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Of course, yes. And please let me know when it's out as well.
Definitely. And also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, again for your valuable time and sharing some of your experiences and answering to some of my questions.
Of course, and thank you for the invite, and keep in touch. Let me know how you get on.
Great, sir. Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.